Before we begin, I want to test one assumption. Okay, it's a true false. The primary job of content is to educate. Type T or F in the chat. Before we begin, I want to test one assumption. Okay, interesting. Some of you see education as the goal. Some of you already sense that that's incomplete, right? But here's the distinction I want to explore today. Education increases what people know, but interpretation changes what people can decide. And that's the gap the entire presentation today is going to address. So most people think the advantage in the AI era will belong to whoever can create the most. I think the opposite is happening. The advantage is moving towards the people who can interpret reality more clearly than everyone else. So think about the last person whose judgment you trusted enough to act on. Not someone you liked, not someone you followed, someone whose interpretation changed what you did. So that's what this talk is about. Not content volume, not personal branding, not reach. It's about how judgment becomes trust, how trust becomes authority, and how authority becomes economic leverage. Content gets published, but interpretation gets relied upon. So to understand why this matters, we have to look at what the old market rewarded. So in every market, value migrates towards whatever becomes scarce. When information was scarce, the information had value. When distribution was scarce, reach had value. Now, both are becoming abundant. So I want you to think about this. Raise your hand if you've used AI this week to summarize research, draft, to compare, or to explain something. Exactly. That supply answers is no longer the constraint. I'm going to say that again. The supply of answers is no longer the constraint. So over the next few minutes, I want to show you three transitions. The first one, how information becomes judgment. Second, how judgment becomes trust and authority. And the third is how authority becomes owned economic leverage. And by the end, you should be able to identify exactly where that sequence breaks in your own work. So in the world where information is abundant, trust, interpretation becomes the scarce economic asset. This is not a claim about content strategy. It's a claim about where value moves when the bottleneck changes. So the market does not reward what is useful in theory. It rewards what remains scarce in practice. So, and for the longest time, the scarce thing was simply access. Now, this is the old game, right? Slightly increase the pace here, right? We're just trying to understand that for the most of modern history, having the answer was a real advantage. Publishing was expensive. Distribution was controlled. Expertise was difficult to access. So the person who could get the right information to the right audience captured the value. That's why newspapers mattered. That's why universities mattered. And that's why gatekeepers mattered. So think about how recent access itself felt valuable. A report, a database, a specialist, a proprietary framework. So the old bottleneck was access. The new bottleneck is judgment. So because when access became nearly free, the value did not disappear, it just moved. So the new game is judgment, right? So AI did not eliminate value, it relocated it. So retrieval became abundant. Summarization became abundant. Production became abundant. But someone still has to decide what matters, what is noise, what applies here, and what should happen next. So, how many of you have received an AI answer that was technically useful, but still did not help you decide? And that's the gap. The gap is judgment. The scarce capability is no longer finding information. It's applying context, experience, and discernment to uncertainty. So AI produces possibilities, but judgment produces direction. And that's why I think we have been describing the creative economy incorrectly. The creator economy has been misnamed, right? The word creator makes us focus on output. How much did they publish? How often did they publish? How many views did they get? But those are production metrics. The most durable people in this economy are not merely producing content, they're producing trust. So content is the delivery mechanism, but trust is the asset. So have you ever followed someone who published less than everyone else, but whose words carried more weight? And that's the distinction. High output creates volume, but high interpretive accuracy, now that creates authority. So you're not rewarded because you said more. You're rewarded because people learn to rely on how you see, how you think, how you understand, and how you communicate. So why does interpretation matter more than information? Because information alone rarely moves people. So you might be asking, why doesn't information alone move people? Because knowing is not the same as deciding. So people can understand the facts and still remain stuck. So information raises awareness, but interpretation reduces uncertainty. And decision becomes possible when uncertainty falls below the level of perceived risk. So think of one decision you delayed, even though you already had enough information. Okay, so remember, information is available, abundant, undifferentiated, right? But interpretation, that's where it's contextualized, judged, and trusted. But the decision, right, action taken, that's when uncertainty, right, a perceived risk is lowered below that level, right? So maybe it was hiring for a business owner. Maybe it was leaving a job, right? Maybe it was showing up on camera. So I want you to think of a decision you delayed, even though you had enough information. It could have been starting a business, or 25 years in healthcare could be choosing the right treatment, or just choosing any treatment at all. Or in personal lives, could be ending a relationship, could be starting a relationship. So what were you actually waiting for? It's usually is not more facts. It's usually confidence. So information explains the options, but interpretation helps someone move. So I learned this long ago before I had language for communicator economics. I learned it in rooms where the consequences were real. So I spent years watching people make decisions under pressure, whether it's in the ER, whether it's, before surgery, whether it's in the community health, whether it's in prison, right? Whether it's in detox, right? Whether it's in oncology, as I help support families, they often receive the same clinical information. They saw the same scans, saw the same, staging, the same treatment options, and still reached completely different decisions. So the variable was not the data, right? The variable was whether someone they trusted helped them make sense of it. So when the interpretation was clear, uncertainty narrowed. When uncertainty narrowed, movement became possible. So that taught me something I have never forgotten. People do not move because information exists. They move when someone helps them understand what the information means for them. So the stakes online are usually lower, but the mechanism is not. So trust changes behavior before it changes outcomes. That's why I no longer think trust as a soft concept. So trust is, remember, is the decision infrastructure. Trust is not decoration around the decision. It's the infrastructure that allows the decision to happen. So trust reduces hesitation. It compresses perceived risk. It lowers the cognition choosing, of the cost of choosing, right? It allows movement before certainty is complete. So think about how quickly you decide when the source is trusted. Now compare it with how much proof you demand from someone you don't trust. That's a different economic, right? That's the difference in that economic space. Trust affects conversion, pricing power, sales cycle length, retention, referrals, and resistance. So persuasion pushes. Trust removes the need to push as hard. And that's exactly why most creators, most businesses remain fragile. Because persuasion pushes, but trust removes the need to push hard. So what most creators build is a fragile system, right? A large audience can hide a weak business. So if reach is controlled by a platform, the business is rented. If revenue depends on a constant output, the business is exhausted. If monetization depends on sponsorships, and the business is exposed. So if virality is the strategy, right? Volatility is built on or built into the model. So those are the mechanisms, right? If reach is controlled by a platform, the business is rented. If revenue depends on constant output, the business is exhausted. And if monetization depends on sponsorship, the business is exposed. So ask yourself one uncomfortable question. If you stop publishing for 30 days, what would remain? Would trust remain? Would demand remain? Would relationships remain? Would revenue remain? Remember, fragility is not low reach. Fragility is when leverage disappears the moment activity stops. So activity produces motion, but infrastructure produces continuity. And this brings us to one of the most important distinctions in the entire talk today. Visibility is not authority. Attention means you were noticed, but authority means you were believed. I'm going to say that again. Attention means you were noticed, but authority means you were believed. They're not the same asset. Visibility is created through reach and frequency, but authority is created through interpretive accuracy of repetition over time. Let me say that again. So authority is created through interpretive accuracy repeated over time. So you can be highly visible, but lightly trusted. You can be modestly visible, but deeply relied upon. So think of someone with a huge audience whose advice you never follow. And think of someone with a small audience whose advice you treasure. All right, so there's a lot here. This is, this in this flywheel, this is the mechanism underneath durable authority. Okay, so we're going to walk through this. We have observation, right? You notice something others are experiencing but have not yet named, right? You have interpretation. You explain why it's happening. Okay, we have clarity. The audience understands their situation differently. We have trust. They begin to rely on your judgment. Then you have behavior change. They act. Then you have proof. The action produces a result. Then you have authority. Your interpretation gains weight. Then you have ownership. The relationship deepens and becomes less platform dependent. Okay, you have this flywheel here. It goes observation, interpretation, building trust, right? You have clarity, trust, behavior change, proof, authority, ownership. So what stage are you strongest at? Is it observation? Is it explanation? Is it building trust? Is it helping people act? The flywheel strengthens only when interpretation produces real clarity. So content frequency feeds the algorithm, but interpretive accuracy feeds a reputation. And that's when this cycle repeats, certain assets begin to compound. So what actually compounds? Right? The most online metrics measure activity. Very few measure accumulation. Okay? Views disappear. Trends decay. Algorithmic reach resets. Right? The algorithm always changes. But trust can strengthen, right? Reputation can precede you. Proof can travel. Owned relationships can survive platform changes, right? We have trust, owned relationships, reputation, and proof. So look at what you're building right now. Which part gets stronger because it existed yesterday? That is the compounding asset, right? Remember, we just covered views disappear, trends decay, Algorithmic reach resets, but trust can strengthen, right? Reputation can precede you, goes before you. Proof can travel, but owned relationships can survive platform changes. So trust does not compound automatically. It compounds when interpretation remains accurate, useful, and aligned over time. So virality is borrowed momentum. Reputation is stored judgment. So if content is still the delivery mechanism, what should content actually do? So content has 4 jobs, right? Provide value is not the strategy. It's too vague to guide the system, right? So we're going to walk through this. Okay, so content can reveal, man, it names the tension the audience feels but cannot articulate. It can interpret, right? It can show. It explains why the tension exists. It can validate. It shows people that their confusion is not a personal failure. It can mobilize. It gives a decision, a model, and the next action. Right? So think about your last 5 pieces of content. What job did each one perform? If the answer is a little of everything, the system probably has no clear job. Okay, random content fills a feed, but purposeful content moves a relationship. And before any of those jobs can happen, the audience must first recognize themselves. And I developed a diagnostic creative. Everybody talks about hooks. Hooks are the recognition system, right? The strongest hook is not always the loudest line, right? It's often the most accurate one. So think about it. The audience feels. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what I've been experiencing. That moment matters because recognition lowers the psychological distance or the defense, right? It tells the audience, this person sees my situation clearly. So finish this sentence silently. The thing nobody understands about my work is. That sentence may contain a better hook than any trend-based formula. Performance grabs attention, but recognition earns receptivity. The best hooks do not merely stop the scroll, they diagnose the moment, right? They reveal, right? So once you begin listening for those moments, your audience becomes much more than a follower count. The audience is not a following, right? An audience is not merely who receives your thinking. It is part of how your thinking improves. Okay, audience questions reveal unresolved uncertainty. Objections reveal trust frictions, right, that are rubbing. Language reveals identity, who they are at their core. Behavior reveals demand. And responses reveal what deserves deeper interpretation. So I want you to diagnose how you currently treat your audience. So this is interactive. Type data. If you systematically record objections, repeated questions, buying language, and patterns. Okay, type notifications if you mostly respond, you clear your screen, and just move on. Okay, then interpret the actual pattern. What am I seeing that's important? How many people are building distribution without building memory? right? Your audience is continuously showing you where uncertainty remains unresolved. But unless those signals are captured and compared, the intelligence disappears with the notification. So a well-attended audience sharpens your interpretation. It tells you where your market still lacks clarity. A following gives you reach, but a sensing network gives you intelligence. But the relationship remains fragile until access becomes direct. Okay, when does distribution turn trust into leverage? When does it do that? So social media reach is conditional. Email, direct communities, client relationships, and memberships create continuity. The point is not to abandon platforms. The point is to convert borrowed attention into owned relationships. So if every platform changed its algorithm tomorrow, could you still reach the people who trust you? If not, you have attention. You don't have the infrastructure. So let's move on into what is economic architecture? What is that? This is the sequence that is structural. You cannot skip the gates. Attention means someone encountered you, but recognition means they remembered you. Trust means they believe you. Authority means they defer to your judgment. Demand means they seek your help. Ownership means the relationship is direct. So leverage means the system produces repeatable and measurable value beyond the next post. Okay, so we covered that. So we have attention. We're attracting visibility and reach, right? That's when somebody encountered you, right? Recognition means they remember you, be known, and consistently seen. Trust builds reliability and credibility. It means they believe you, right? Authority means they defer to your judgment, demonstrate expertise and leadership. And in demand, create desire for your offering, right? It means they seek you for help to solve their problems. Okay, but there's ownership, right? Direct relationship. It means you own the direct relationship. Okay, but then there's leverage. Okay, very few talk about these last two. Okay, leverage means the system produce repeatable and measurable value beyond the next post. Okay, so now identify the first place where your system becomes unreliable. So type that one word in the chat. Is it attention? Is it recognition? Is it trust? Is it authority? Is it demand? Have you thought about ownership or leverage? Because that answer matters because each break requires a different intervention. More content cannot repair missing trust. A better offer cannot repair missing authority. More reach cannot create ownership. You do not need more activity everywhere. You need accuracy at the point of failure. So each bottleneck creates a different business problem. So more attention does not repair missing trust. More offers do not repair missing authority. And this is why so many intelligent people struggle with the niche. Right? So why do people struggle with the niche? Right? People resist specificity because they confuse the mechanism with the market. The mechanism can be universal, but the entry point cannot. Every human experiences uncertainty. That's across the board. But people they only feel, recognize when people speak precisely to their context. Okay, they only feel recognized. Oh, he's speaking directly to me. Okay, so I struggled with narrowing my niche, my own thinking, right? And my mechanism appeared everywhere, right? Because it appears in healthcare, it appears in leadership, it appears in business, it appears in content, it appears in operations, it appears in decision making. Okay, but university, right? Universality does not, at the mechanism, right, level, does not eliminate the need for specificity at the communication level. So I struggled with this too. So ask yourself, I want you to write down two answers for me. What universal problem do you or do I understand? In other ways, what universal mechanism do you understand? And whose version of the problem or mechanism can you describe with unusual precision? Let's be honest here. Because most people try to niche by shrinking their intelligence. But the better move is to preserve the mechanism and specify the doorway. Remember, there's a universal mechanism where, hey, what I do is everywhere. I work in healthcare, business, leadership, content. I can help everybody. Or there's a specific doorway. And that leads to the role, I think, becoming, this is where everything's becoming increasingly valuable as we move on. Right? So the future creator is an interpreter. The future does not belong to the person who can produce the most. It belongs to the person whose judgment becomes more useful. So AI will only continue to improve at generation. It will draft faster. It will summarize faster. It will repurpose faster. But the value migrates toward, right, discernment, pattern recognition, context, taste, and demonstrated accuracy. So what do people consistently come to you to make sense of? Not merely what you know, but what do you help them see? The interpreter wins by reducing uncertainty in the domain people cannot navigate alone. Maybe there's contrast, right? There's contrasting ideas here. Output scales production, but interpretation scales reliance. So I want to leave you with one question. Stop asking, what should I make? Okay, ask instead, what uncertainty do I reduce? For whom? And for what moment? What exact moment? With what perspective they cannot easily find for themselves? Okay, so what uncertainty do I reduce? For whom? At what moment? And with what perspective they cannot easily find elsewhere? Because the future belongs to people who can become trusted interpreters of reality. Not because they publish more, but because they observe more carefully. They explain more honestly. They judge more accurately and build the kind of trust that makes their perspective worth acting on. So think about a domain where people are surrounded by information, but still lack clarity. That's where your opportunity may be. The interpreter does not merely communicate. They reduce the cost of being uncertain. And uncertainty has always been expensive. I want to thank you for being here, taking part in this. If today's presentation changed the way you think, not just about content, but about trust, about judgment, and about how value is created in an AI-driven world, I invite you to stay connected. Every week, I explore the hidden operating systems behind authority, decision-making, and leverage across business, leadership, and the creator economy. So if you're interested in building a durable authority instead of chasing temporary attention, I'd love to continue the conversation with you. And before you leave, I want to leave you with the same question I am constantly asking myself. What uncertainty can I reduce that meaningfully changes someone else's decision? I'm going to say it again. What uncertainty can I reduce that meaningfully changes someone else's decisions? I think that answer to that question may become one of the most valuable assets you'll ever build. Thank you. Till next time.